Hi, my presentation is called From Solving Equations to Developing Thinkers, my journey through TE 615. Throughout this course, I used a lesson on solving multi-step equations with an amplify activity called algebra tiles as my focal lesson. Looking back at my assignments and reflections, I actually realized my understanding of critical thinking changed much more than I actually expected. At the beginning of the course, I believed that if students could successfully solve challenging math problems, they were demonstrating critical thinking. By the end of the course, I actually realized that critical thinking is much deeper than getting the correct answer. It involves students explaining, justifying, reflecting on, and defending their actual thinking. Today, I'll share two of the biggest shifts in my thinking and how they've changed the way I design instruction. My journey started with my beginning reflection and my Module 1 lesson analysis. My focal lesson throughout the course was solving multi-step equations using Amplify's algebra tiles. At that point, I believed that rigorous problems naturally led to critical thinking. If students solved the equation correctly and showed their work, I assumed they understood the math. Looking back now, I realized I was mostly valuing procedural success instead of looking for evidence of students' thinking. The first major shift in my thinking came during Module 1. Reading Fassion's work on critical thinking, along with Willingham's discussion of how students learn, challenged one of my biggest assumptions. I realized that solving difficult problems doesn't automatically mean that students are thinking critically. Critical thinking requires students to justify their reasons, evaluate different approaches, explain their decisions, and reflect on their learning. My Module 1 analysis helped me recognize that my original lesson emphasized procedural accuracy much more than student reasoning. That was an important turning point because it changed what I began looking for when I observed student learning, or when I have observed student learning. After Module 1, I began thinking differently about what evidence of learning actually looks like. Instead of asking whether students arrived at the correct answer, I started asking questions to myself like, can they explain why? Can they justify the strategy? Can they make mathematical decisions? Can they reflect on whether the solution makes sense? Those four ideas, reasoning, justification, decision-making, and reflection, have become the indicators of critical thinking that now guide my lesson planning. My second major shift focused on instructional design and purposeful technology integration. Before this course, I often viewed technology as a way to increase engagement. Learning about Kolb's Triple E framework helped me think much more intentionally about technology. Instead of asking whether students enjoyed using technology, I now ask whether it actually supports thinking. In my Triple E analysis, I found that Amplify engages students through collaboration and immediate feedback. It enhances learning through adaptive scaffolds and virtual algebra tiles, and extends learning by helping students connect math concepts to authentic applications. The framework helped me realize that technology should strengthen students' thinking, not simply digitize instruction. Another important influence on my instructional design thinking was Universal Design for Learning, or UDL. Studying the UDL guidelines changed my way of thinking about learner access. Previously, I sometimes used scaffolds as making learning easier. Now I understand that effective supports remove barriers without reducing cognitive demand. In this lesson, students who struggle to visualize abstract algebraic relations can use virtual algebra tiles and adaptive supports. Those supports allows students to focus on math reasoning rather than simply decoding the procedures. This completely changed how I think about equity and rigor. They're not competing goals. They just, work together. This change in my thinking also transformed the way I design assessments. One of the strongest examples comes from my assessment redesign assignment. Originally, my traditional assessment asked students to solve an equation and show their work. They measured procedural fluency, but it actually didn't reveal students' thinking. After revising the assessments, students modeled the equation using algebra tiles and explained why removing equal amounts from both sides preserves the balance of the equation. Now I'm assessing conceptual understanding, justification, and metacognition instead of only checking for the correct answer. The assignment showed me that assessment should make student thinking visible. When I think about everything I've learned throughout TE 615, I no longer see these ideas as separate instructional strategies. Purposeful technology connects rigorous tasks, learner access through UDL, meaningful assessment, and ongoing reflection. When I design instruction now, I begin by asking, what kind of thinking do I want students to show, to demonstrate? Then I decide how technology, assessment, and instructional supports can help students make that thinking visible. That's a very different planning process than the one I had at the beginning of the course. As I continue teaching, I know there's still room for growth. One area I want to continue developing is designing assessments that consistently capture students' reasoning and metacognition, especially for students with diverse learning needs. My professional goal is to continue learning how purposeful technology and UDL can support rigorous mathematical thinking without lowering cognitive demand. This course also strengthened two of the math degree learning outcomes. First, it deepened my understanding of purposeful technology integration by helping me evaluate digital tools using research-based frameworks like EEE. Second, it strengthened my ability to design instruction that promotes critical and inquiry-based learning by shifting my focus from procedural accuracy to students' reasoning, justification, and reflection. Looking back at my beginning reflection, I can clearly see how my thinking has evolved. When I started this course, my goal was to help students solve equations correctly. Now my goal is much deeper. I want every student to become confident mathematical thinkers who can explain, justify, and reflect on their learning. Thanks.